You're listening to This Motorcycle Life, conversations about why we ride. Episode 43, This is Us. I'm Bruce Philp, and thank you for listening. So what is a motorcyclist? Are we really as different as we feel under our helmets? Well, in a moment, you're going to meet someone who has ridden thousands of miles to document this community in what might be the most ambitious attempt ever to find out, even if that wasn't exactly the plan. And the answer? Well, it's a qualified yes, as it turns out, but only if we remember to look. I'll clear that up for you shortly, but first, let's briefly take care of some very important business. Well, as always, thank you to everyone who has written me over the last month. You know by now how much I appreciate your encouragement, but if you don't mind, this time around I'm going to focus this moment in the podcast on the Movember Foundation. Well, this episode will arrive in the month of November, the Foundation's most important time of year when it comes to raising money for men's cancers and mental health. If you have a friend who's growing a mustache for the cause this month, then by all means, please support them. But if you haven't, then please support Movember through this podcast by clicking on the mustache in my show notes. On my website, you can also find a brief explanation of why I chose to support Movember among all of the world's worthy causes. Check it out. Let me know what you think, and give if you can. And with that, why don't we get started? Well, a few months ago, I stumbled on an art project called The Motorcycle Portrays by Los Angeles documentary photographer David Goldman. The premise was irresistible to me, mostly because it seemed like a braver, cooler attempt to do what this podcast has tried to do, and that's to present a truer and maybe more nuanced picture of who we are. I featured David in my newsletter this past spring, and shortly after that I learned that he was doubling down on the project by hitting the road for 4 months to take more portraits across North America. And as his collection grew, it just got better. David took photos of celebrities who ride, like Lyle Lovett, for example, motorcycle celebrities like Jack Penton and Kevin Schwantz, and dozens of fellow riders that you might not have heard of at all. And these were more than just photos. Goldman also interviewed each subject and included their voices with the photos in his online gallery, even adding the geo-coordinates for where he'd met them. The result is a surprisingly intimate experience that kind of makes the famous more human and the ordinary more special. Well, I loved it, and so I followed his journey pretty closely. And then, late last summer, I found out through the grapevine that David Goldman would be passing through my neck of the woods on his way west and stopping not 20 minutes away to get some repairs done to his bike. Well, I did what you'd do. We made contact. We spent a rainy morning together while his bike was being tended to, and by the time we parted company, it was obvious that David Goldman's Odyssey had to be an episode. Once he was home safe and sound a few weeks later, we reconnected, and this is that conversation. I found David Goldman in between naps at his home in Los Angeles, California. Hey, David, thanks for joining me. You're home safe and sound in LA, I guess. How are you settling in?
I'm settling in well. Thank you very much. And thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I'm excited to be part of it. I'm recovering from the exhaustion. And normally I take a nap every day at 3 o'clock. I've been taking a nap at 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock these days. But I'm starting to come out of my stupor.
Yeah, stupor must be the word. When I met you a bunch of weeks ago, you talked about the gravitational pull of standing still, and I'm wondering if you're missing the road yet.
No, I'm not really missing it quite yet. My mind has begun already to focus on how I can expand the project to next summer. So I'm kind of I feel like the time goes by so fast. So I'm trying to be really cognizant of the time I have to put together, a pitch or whatever it takes to try to get other brands or companies involved to help me move it forward. So I'm not really missing the road. I'm just focusing on getting a lot of work done and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine how this is, this could eat you up, which I guess we'll get into a bit. I'm so fascinated by what you're doing here, and to be honest, a little bit jealous, which we'll also get to. But why don't we start off with the ritual podcaster, icebreaker, and ask how you became a motorcyclist. Where did David Goldman, the rider, come from?
Oh, okay. Well, David Goldman, the writer, comes from Sandy Burns, his mother, who was very stubborn. And like my mom, I'm very stubborn. And so when I was 16 and, got my license straight away, I skipped school and went and got my learner's permit and wanted to get a car. But my parents were like, we're not buying you a car. And not that I was expecting some fancy car, just to be clear, we were like just middle class, but my mom was like, we're not getting you a car. And I'm like, fine, then I'm going to get a motorcycle. And she's like, no, you're not. And I was like, yes, I am. And so I went and I took the motorcycle training course in Toronto. And it was basically like a battle of wills against my mom. And anyway, I found a used, this was like in 1986, and I found a used GS 550 ES. I guess it's a Suzuki. Can't even remember.
Right.
And anyway, my mom drove me downtown and I bought this bike. I don't remember how much, from a guy, and he took off to his cottage. It was a long weekend. Anyway, my mom followed me home, and basically all weekend long, the bike was breaking down. And I'm wearing a leather jacket and trying to be all protected and stuff as best I could be back then. And it was so hot. I feel like it was August or July or August, whatever. And anyway, the bike kept breaking down, and then I would drop it, and it was so hot, and I was pushing it. I was dying. And my mom says, she goes, what did she say? She goes, you're going to return that bike on Monday or on Tuesday, whenever the long weekend was over, I guess on Tuesday. And he's going to give you your money back, and we'll pay for insurance for a car. And you can use that money to buy a crappy old car. So I bought an old Honda Accord that looked like it was shot with a machine gun of rust bullets. It was just like riddled with rust holes. But anyway, I had that car, and I didn't have a bike again. I had rented bikes occasionally over the years. I did a trip when I lived in LA, I rented a Harley and rode up from LA to Laguna Seca. I went to Spain and I rode from Barcelona down to Valencia and back up. And that kind of thing. And I had a buddy in Toronto. I was living in New York now, and I had a buddy in Toronto who had a old Honda CB400F Super Sport. And I used to always ask him, hey, Rick, want to sell me that bike? And he would be, no. And then for whatever reason, one day he said, okay. And I bought that bike off him. And that was about 9 or 10 years ago. And I rode that bike from Toronto to Brooklyn. Oh, wow. And that was my first official bike. And I had it for a couple of years. And then I just felt, even though I loved it and people loved that bike, I just felt it was kind of a little small and you couldn't really go very far, even though it was a very cool bike. And then another photographer, a friend I had an 04 Triumph Thruxton, and he sold it to me for an unbelievably good deal. It only had 2,500 miles on it, I think, or 4,500. And he sold it to me for essentially what I sold this CB for. Wow. I couldn't believe how cheap it was. And I had to have like a real poker face. And I said, well, listen, as long as the bike has no mechanical issues beyond $500, I'll take it off you. And I took it over to the shop in Brooklyn, and they're like, how much did you just buy this bike for? And I told them, and they're like, the guy's like, I'll give you like another $3,000 more right now. Anyway, so that kind of sold it for me. And I had the Thruxton for a bunch of years. And then I took it up to Toronto, and then I moved back to LA. I brought it here, and then I sold it last summer to buy my KTM to do this series.
Wow.
That was a long answer.
No, that's a perfect answer. We don't need to get into this, but the one suspicious thing I find in your story is that when you went to get your first bike, you already knew how to ride and had a leather jacket. And if I was your dad, I'd need some explanation for that. But
well, I took the motorcycle course.
Oh, of course. Okay.
I took the motorcycle course, so I learned how to do it. That was my thing. Like, I told my mom, I'll take the course. I'll learn how to do it, because like I've always been safety conscious, and they definitely weren't going to let me do it without that. So that's how I knew how to ride.
Yeah, that's great. That CD400, it is a pretty cool bike. I could see why you would want to do long distances on it, but I love how those look. Just a slight and brief departure, because I think it's going to matter to the story. I wonder if you could just tell us in your own words what your, if you like, your day job is, what your kind of your career is outside of the motorcycle world.
Well, I'm a documentary and portrait photographer, filmmaker. I've been a photographer really my whole professional career. I went to photography school when I was 19, 20, whatever. And then I worked in Toronto for a number of years. I assisted photographers, and then I moved to California, to LA in the mid 90s, and I was an assistant, and I worked with some of the biggest photographers in the world. And then I graduated to shooting on my own and shooting music and album packaging and publicity and celebrities. I did a pretty well-known Blink-182 album cover that a lot of people know, Enema of the State, which sold 15 million copies or something. So it's one of those albums that I'm very lucky to have shot. I sort of came up with the idea for the design and everything. I mean, obviously there were art directors and stuff, but basically I came up with the visual, and everybody knows it. So that's kind of a weird thing, but it's not at all the type of work I do anymore. But anyway, I did that for a long time, the music and celebrity. And then I moved to New York, and I kind of transitioned more into documentary work. And I started to travel for that work and do work in India and Cambodia and Ethiopia and Bangladesh and Australia, the Northern Territory of Australia. And I focus on human rights and maternal health and marginalized people and human trafficking and stuff like that. So I try to bring awareness to issues and causes that mean something to me, in the hopes that other people will be educated and perhaps move to take action, whether it's becoming educated or donating money or that kind of thing. And so I do that, and I do sort of photojournalist work for newspapers or magazines. At the end of the day, I call myself a portrait photographer, though, because it's always portraiture that I focus on. Right.
Okay. Perfect. Because as you can probably guess, we're gonna come back to what those eyes bring to this project. Speaking of which, how about you set the table for us here and tell us, briefly, just tell us about the motorcycle portraits and the trip you've just come home from.
Tell you about it, like sort of what it is and everything?
Yeah.
All right. Well, so as I was saying, I do documentary work, and the genesis of this story goes back a little bit. I had been doing work in India, and I did a story on migrant sugarcane workers. And the first project I did for UN Women when I first went to India, it was very clear to me how motorcycles were used as a utilitarian tool. A father could get his kids to school, to get an education, to extricate themselves from poverty, versus in the West, how a motorcycle is a luxury item. So I just thought that was interesting. And at the time I had been doing some portraits at 60 Minutes at CBS. And I was curious to know why they hadn't done more with their brand, like image wise. I thought it's an iconic show. And I was flummoxed to know why that you would watch the show on a Sunday, but you never really had any more information about it. And growing up, I used to read Rolling Stone magazine, I looked at the pictures, and I thought it was really cool that they had kind of an annual photo album at the end of the year they would do. And I kind of presented to 60 Minutes, you guys should do an annual, you like interview incredible politicians and artists and creatives and fascinating people. And then the show just sort of disappears. You have no access to it. So why not use an iPad app and use different travel technology or partner with different travel things and be able to click and get more behind the scenes and do a portrait series and all this kind of stuff. And they were kind of interested, but it's very difficult to turn a giant ship like CBS. So I went and I did a project on migrant sugarcane workers, and I said, I will use the technology that I think would be appropriate for this 60 Minutes project. And I used audio and GPS and augmented reality in addition to portraiture. And I came back and I showed it to them, and they were really into it. And it seemed like it was going to happen, but then for whatever reason, they didn't. And then I thought maybe this would be good for a motorcycle brand. And I had approached one of the very big motorcycle brands, and I had a really great meeting with them. And I had done a portrait prior, and I did basically an interview and the GPS and all that kind of stuff. And the individual told a story about how he was a kid and he went to the motorcycle show and he saw this bike and he wanted his bike, and his dad, said no or whatever. And then come Christmas, there was a string wrapped around the Christmas tree, and it wrapped all the way, kind of wound through the house and then out the side door and into the garage, and there was a motorcycle there for him. Mm-hmm. And so he told the story, and the brand of that bike just happened to coincide with the meeting that I was having. Oh. And they were like, oh, this is amazing. And I thought I was meeting with one guy, but I ended up meeting with like a pretty big part of the marketing department. And I rolled out of there thinking, oh my God, I can't believe this is going to happen. They're going to give me a bike to travel around the world, and I'm going to be able to do these portraits. And anyway, they kind of ghosted me after a few months. But in the meantime, I just was interested in doing these portraits. So it kind of became a self-funded, self-assigned series. And when I was in India, I would do a portrait of like Bobby Singh from Old Delhi Motorcycles or Vijay Singh from Rajputana. Mm. And it just slowly started to build. And I would reach out on Instagram to, somebody, and it's like a web, right? And you see one person and they're following another person. And slowly it started to grow. And so last summer during COVID, not this previous one, but the year before, so it was 2020, I was sitting on the couch in LA just eating too much ice cream. And I thought, you know what, screw it. I've always wanted to do this series using the motorcycle as a mobile photo studio. So I sold my Thruxton. I bought a KTM 790 Adventure, and I loaded it up and I headed out. And I basically, with the idea of kind of a proof of concept, seeing if I could actually do these portraits on the road and use the bike. And it was incredible. I was gone for, 2 months or something. And I rode 6,000 miles from from LA up through Northern California into Oregon and Washington and Wyoming and Montana and Utah and Colorado and Arizona and Nevada and back to California. And I think I shot 17 portraits, met a ton of people. And at the time, AMA magazine had run a series, 2 different covers and a bunch of inside pictures of some of the photos I had done. So a lot of the subjects had actually seen some of my work. So they were more amenable to me being there if I would just roll up. And that's kind of how it started. And then this summer I just kind of continued it, and I traveled across the southern US and up into Canada and to, from Maine into New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. And I took the ferry to Newfoundland and then to Labrador, and I did the Trans-Labrador Highway down into Quebec and Ontario and, Manitoba and Saskatchewan and Alberta and British Columbia and back down through the States, through Washington and Oregon and California. And I was on the road for 16 weeks and 1 day. And that's kind of the story. And I shot another, 30 something portraits. I don't even know how many. So I'm closing in on 80.
Wow.
I have a few to do next week, in fact. And so
it's amazing.
Chucking along.
Yeah. Well, and so that kind of gets to why, I sort of jokingly said I was jealous because you're kind of doing what this podcast tries to do, except it's at 100 kilometers an hour and with infinitely more style. I'm curious. I was going to ask you, maybe you've partly answered this, whether there was anything to the timing of the journey. I had this sense that this became personal for you, and I think you've kind of affirmed that here. But it occurred to me that, the pandemic was still in pretty full force when you left California. And I was wondering whether there was anything in all this that you needed for your own spiritual health. I mean, people's experience of this is all over the map, from neutral to, kind of traumatized. And I was just curious to know whether hitting the road at a moment like that had a reason that was, more personal to you.
Yeah, well, it was very personal to me because my mother passed away in February, this past February, and it's been very difficult for me emotionally, and I just needed to clear my head. But I'm not the type of person to do something without direction. Like, I'm not aimless. Right. So having the portrait series as a focus to allow me to have something to do kind of made the traveling a little bit more palatable to my need to accomplish something, Right. But, many times on the road, just as I was told, grief comes in many forms, and it can hit you in a wave. You're minding your own business, and then you're bawling for no reason, not no reason, but for no obvious, like nothing seemed to trigger it. And then you gotta kind of like blink fast and clear your eyes, or you'll crash. Right. So I don't think my mom would want that. But so I was just sort of trying to I don't know, deal or just trying to give myself time to do that, because with COVID and with the lack of work and lack of everything that's going on, the option was just sort of sitting at home and eating too much ice cream, and that didn't seem productive. So yeah, it was, but I still had wanted to do this project regardless. I definitely wanted to do it, but it made it easier for me to say, yeah, I'm going to do it. And that's it. Like, I don't have really anything going on, and I'm in a kind of a shitty headspace. So I'm just going to do this. And it also allowed, I think when, if I were to say to somebody, I'm going to do this, and I think predicated on what was going on personally, that pretty much everybody would be like, yeah, that's a good idea, man. You should do that. Go and take the time and do it. And so it was very well received, other than my uncle, who was afraid of me being on the bike. But everybody else was very encouraging and feeling it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, which it seems to have been. I mean, you hate to reverse engineer, insight to this kind of thing, but it's almost like you went on a long trip to visit family, which, that's a theme I'll touch on in a little bit. As I said when we met in person, I'm really sorry for the loss of your mom. It's never an easy thing, and what a terrible time for it to happen. So, again, my sympathies.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So I guess the trip was therapeutic, or I'm presuming that it was. And I think, even without the loss, I think a lot of us have had our faith in humanity challenged in the last, little while now and then. This podcast has been an immense comfort to me. I wonder if that comfort was also there for you, meeting, fellow riders in the flesh.
Yeah. Well, I have a pretty solid belief, and it's been just, what's the word I'm looking for? Just sort of reiterated to me time and time again about humanity and sort of the good in humanity to the average person in the average situation. I'm convinced that politics and religion and, sort of myriad other things are almost designed to divide and conquer. And I think we're in a very, well, I'm not saying anything that isn't known, right, but I recognize this time as a very contentious time, whether it's politics or religion or abortion, or you just pick the reason, and for me, when I'm on the road, it reaffirms to me that humanity, for the most part, is quite good. And people, and I've said this before, that people are all very similar in so much as they want the best for their family. They want the next generation to do better. They want to be left alone for the most part from government and from things like that. But it's very easy to fall prey to contentious issues that somehow find their way into the public discourse that would used to be a private matter. Like what your opinion was on politics was very private back in the day. I mean, I remember my parents never talked about who they voted for. It wasn't anybody's business.
Yeah.
You know, but if everybody puts a sign on their lawn, then that's very much like asking. It's kind of like a bit of a pissing match, and it's asking for some contentious response down the line. And what I've found in the motorcycle portraits and the traveling is that when I'm on the road and I'm meeting the different people, different cultural, religious, political affiliations, none of it matters. Nobody talks about it. It's irrelevant. I remember going into a guy's house who, and just for the sake of it, I'm a left-wing liberal guy. That's just how I see things. Maybe it's because I'm from Canada and things are more social, whatever. But that's just how I see things. But he had Fox News was on, and there was a Trump hat, and they were Republicans. And if I were to just look at them and judge them, I'd be like, oh, I don't want to be around these people. But the reality was those people opened their home to me and let me stay there and shared their experiences and shared their kindness with me. And it wasn't about religion or politics. And I'm sure we could have absolutely gotten a big fight about it. But what would it have accomplished? What would it have accomplished? It would have accomplished nothing. All it would have done was separated us. And I don't see the value in that. And so when I'm riding around and I'm meeting different people, I have to, obviously I can, to the face of it, I can see that, these people's religion or their politics or whatever, I don't necessarily agree with. But if I can just skip that and get to the humanity, then I know 9 times out of 10, I'm going to agree with their humanity and their kindness. And I want to focus on that. I want to focus on what brings us together, not what separates us.
Right. Which is something I think motorcycle culture at its best is actually pretty good at. Unless you get into a motor oil conversation on the internet, it's we do tend to be kind of ecumenical that way. It's funny, this whole project is a record of a culture, whether that was, an intention that you had or not. It's certainly going to wind up that way. And you've had a lot of experience documenting cultures, people in places that aren't well understood, maybe people who are, challenged, maybe even existentially challenged. So, there's an element of anthropology to what you do for a living and presumably to this initiative as well. And so I guess my long-winded question is, how did you bring those eyes to this project? You are a member of the tribe you are observing, but you're going to try to observe it and record it in a kind of equanimous way. I'm just wondering how that was for you.
Well, I think my goal as a photographer is to allow the subject to feel comfortable to share their story, particularly when we're talking about an audio element, because that's so much of what this is about.
Yeah. And
I feel it's a tremendous privilege when somebody allows me to do a portrait of them. I don't take it lightly. I really do think it's a privilege. And so when somebody allows me to do that, I want to respect them and I want to take a photo that shows them in a good light or shows them how they are. It doesn't have to be, it's not a beauty light. It's not a celebrity shot, but I want it to be good. So in a very, what I think makes me a professional photographer, a portrait photographer, is my ability to make the subject feel comfortable as quickly as possible. So they will share their story in a way that resonates with the viewer. My hope is that when, as a viewer, you look at the photo and you can connect in some way. And if you can't get there all the way from from just the image, then the audio will kind of take you across the line. So I just feel the motorcycles they're cool. They're a cool backdrop or whatever. But what I really like are the people. Like for me, this is another entry point to communities, and whether that's photographing, prostituted women or indigenous communities or whatever, it's about them trusting me to help to tell their story. So that's what it's about for me. It could be a motorcycle, it could be, doesn't matter. I just happen to like the motorcycles, and it's a way for me to travel, and it just sort of works well with my aesthetic. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a dorky question. I mean, I'll cop to it. Like, I love photography. I have no talent for it, but it's one of my most favorite art forms. So I will now and then drift into questions that probably no one listening is interested in hearing the answers to, but hopefully everyone will bear with me. I guess kind of on that subject, I was really interested in the dimension of audio and the sort of geolocation piece of this thing. I felt like you'd created a kind of a new art form here that was, it had that sort of distance that still photography has, but it was more intimate, not quite as intimate as film, but almost. And there seemed to be some utility in kind of drawing the line where you did. I wonder why you thought those things were so important.
Well, I got into audio and GPS when I was doing the story on migrant sugarcane workers in India, because I thought it was fascinating that, some guy is working in the state of Karnataka in India to harvest sugar and the whole thing. So somebody in Europe can crack a sugar packet and put it into their coffee. And I think that on one level, people think the world is very small. They're like, oh, it's so small and blah, 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 blah. But in reality, the world is humongous. And I think this perception that the world is small makes it really easy to forget the amount of legwork it takes to get something from one place to the other. We're starting to see it now, certainly with deliveries, because of COVID and all of that, and inflation and everything as a result of it. So I had done some interviews of the subjects, and I thought they were really powerful. And I thought the GPS was a cool element because it shows the distances, and that's really it. I felt it would be like a cool way to leverage different technologies to give a broader understanding of the portrait.
Yep. Well, that's really the effect it has. A couple of minutes ago, you said it's not the motorcycles, it's the people, and that reminded me of the Lyle Lovett interview. And I remember thinking when I watched that one that he felt more like a real dude to me, because for some weird reason, it made a difference that I knew where he was, and I could hear him talking. Yeah. So I totally buy that. So, I mean, just maybe a little more on the process. It looks like when you, and I'm basing this on the portraits that you've published on your website so far, so I appreciate that that's not the whole collection. But it looks like you had some higher profile people, in your sites. It also looks like there were a number of people that you knew and admired who, may not have been quite as high profile, but you could make connections with in some way. And it also looks like there were some subjects that were just random discoveries. So I was curious to know how you decided when someone's life was, to use your words, deeply connected to motorcycles, how you decided when that was sufficiently true to put them in your lens.
Well, what I really like about this project and how it relates to me as a photographer is that the choices I make are 100% my choice. Nobody is telling me to photograph so and so. There's not a client saying you need to, photograph this person or that person. I'm not in the pocket of anybody. So the choices are solely mine. And I think because of where I'm at mentally with what's gone on, with my mom and all this kind of stuff, I'm taking a very kind of chill approach to this. I find the term, but I'm going to use it. I find the term a little bit obnoxious, but an organic approach to this project, like if I wanted to photograph somebody, but they were not interested or they weren't available, perhaps in the past I'd be more bummed out or whatever, but I'm just kind of rolling with it. I'm like, oh, okay, they don't want to do it. Cool, no worries. Maybe they will in the future. So that's one way I'm looking at it. Like if I reach out to a celebrity, or like I tried to get to Bruce Springsteen and they declined. And maybe I would have been really bummed back in the day. Oh, why is he not doing it? Whatever. Now I'm like, well, that's cool. Maybe he will in the future. I can't sweat this. So that's kind of my attitude, which is, it kind of goes to my motto of having low expectations and rarely disappointed. I don't want to get too excited about anything, and I don't want to get too down about anything. So many of the subjects I find, through Instagram, really, I'm like, oh, this person seems cool, or that seems interesting, or whatever. And then conversely, a lot of the subjects I find are a direct result of the current subject. So when I photograph somebody, I always ask, who do you recommend? And if the person that they recommend is, in geographically not too far off the path that I'm on, then I'll reach out to that individual, or maybe the person I'm photographing will reach out to them on my behalf and do an intro. So that's a way and that's been a great way to photograph people. There's been a lot of that. I would say probably most of the subjects are kind of referrals, which has been really, really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think totally legit, actually. We talk about 6 degrees of separation. I think Facebook published a study a few years ago that said it's actually more like 4.5. I think if you ride a motorcycle, it's maybe 2.5. that you could hardly do this without relying on the network, given the nature of the culture. Anyway. It's funny, you talk about working organically, and I acknowledge that you don't like the term, but I can't come up with a better one either. So let's go with that. Acknowledging that you were working that way, I found it interesting that you used a kind of standardized conversation for the audio part, almost like your own little, Proust questionnaire kind of thing. What was which I thought was clever, by the way. What was the thinking there?
Well, I wanted to keep all things similar. I didn't want. First of all, I know when you look at a photo, you're not going to sit and listen to 20 minutes of audio. It's just not, it's just like, I don't think it matters who it is, So I wanted to keep it pretty straightforward. And initially I didn't have a set of questions. I don't remember having like a very specific set of questions. But slowly I kind of whittled it down to what I say are sort of 3.5 questions, and the half being just to introduce yourself. But I feel like if I ask the same questions, then there'll be a consistency to how it goes. I expect that the answers will be different. So that's kind of it. I didn't want to go on too long, and I also didn't want to sit there editing for days, you know?
Yes, I do.
So you know what I mean? So I just wanted to keep it pretty simple. And some people asked me, like I remember I was talking to one individual, and he's like, well, you got to ask people this question. I was like, that is a good question. That's an interesting question, but it doesn't apply to everybody. So I don't want to ask some things that apply to some people that don't apply to other people, because it's going to be a little too, it's going to go off the rails. Although that being said, I do tend to ask women if their experience as women is like, if they can expand upon how they feel being women in a predominantly male dominated activity. Yeah. So sometimes I get some of that feedback, or a person of color. So if there are some differences, like what is their personal experience? Because that's something I don't know as a white man, and I think it's interesting to hear it. And sometimes the stories are very, they're really nice stories. They're really good, and they can be emotional and powerful. And so it's nice to hear the other side of something that I simply don't know.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Was that your biker voice, by the way, that you used back there? I liked it.
My biker what?
Yeah, your biker voice when you were quoting the person saying, "Why don't you ask this question?" I thought maybe that might be your biker voice.
Oh, I don't know. My buddy has a he wants to make a sticker and put it on and put it on his motorcycle that says, "Just because I'm riding a motorcycle doesn't mean I want to talk to you."
I think he might do well with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that makes perfect sense. You mentioned Bruce Springsteen a minute ago, and I was going to ask you if there were any other if there were any big fish out there, people that you wish you could have included. And I get that you chose not to regret those opportunities, but I wonder if there were people that, if there was a motorcycle genie came down and granted you 3 wishes, you might have included in this collection. Anybody come to mind?
Well, yes, but first of all, this collection is not done. So there are people I'm still targeting, and I have feelers out to a bunch of different people who are higher profile. I feel like I'm apprehensive to say who they are.
Okay, fair enough.
It's like I don't know if I want to jinx it, but like whoever you think would be a good sort of celebrity or higher profile person, yeah, I've already thought about it.
Right.
And I'm kind of working on it. So yeah, definitely. There are definitely, and I think that, I want to work towards doing a book, and I think it would behoove me to have some higher profile people in the series to get publishers more inclined to go forward with a book. So, I'm photographing. Yeah, I definitely will and am working on higher profile people, but it doesn't preclude me from shooting the people that I like, that are around. Whether I get celebrities or whatever doesn't stop me from doing it. And they don't give the project more value to me. They may give it more value to a publisher or whatever, but not to me. I feel like every person as an individual who really, if I follow true to my thing of people whose lives are deeply connected to motorcycles, then it doesn't matter if they're a Bruce Springsteen or just like a regular person that nobody knows, because the fundamentals will be the same. They probably started on a dirt bike and they hung on to their dad or their uncle or whatever. So that's what I want to connect with.
Yeah. Yeah, and for whatever little experience I've had talking to people who ride bikes and are high profile, that's probably what they'd want anyway, actually. You live in a town full of those people who hide under motorcycle helmets so they can just feel like normal human beings. So I completely understand what you're saying, and the answer to my question is fair. Why should you tell me if those people are still possibly in play? We'll watch with interest.
Yeah.
So speaking of watching, I got to watch you work a bit when you sort of passed through our area, and your bike ended up at a shop near me for some repairs. And my sense was that there was a real flow to this. You talked earlier about, kind of getting people comfortable quickly, but you didn't seem too concerned about control in the way that a commercial photographer might be. So I'm curious to know, a bit more about that flow state, and how did you decide where to put your subjects and what to have them doing? And I guess most of all, how did you manage to form a sense of who they were as quickly as you did?
That's a good question. Well, I consider myself a photographer that can shoot in any situation. I could light an airplane. I could light a cover for Vanity Fair. I could light anything. But this project, and I've done it, not all those things, but I've lit many things, and I definitely consider myself a very high functioning technician,
right?
Photographically. So, but this series, because I'm on a bike, it doesn't give me the luxury to be dragging around lights and all kinds of things. So immediately when I identify a subject or a location, I have to sort of recognize what's going to be the best position, the best lighting, the best whatever for that portrait, or the best for me in the time I have, I guess is a better way to say it. Because it might not be the best. I mean, maybe if I had more time, I could find a better situation or better location. So I tried to do the interview first. This way, I can talk to the person and get a sense of who they are, and let them. Sorry, my dog is whining.
That's okay.
get get a sense of who they are and them to me, and sort of build up that trust. I always feel like, hold on, Maud, what's wrong? What's wrong, Maud dog? She's whining, I don't know. There was a term that somebody said to me a long time ago. She's like, you don't roll into a community that you don't know, like with guns blazing. Like don't roll up with your camera out.
Yeah.
So that's too much. So roll up as a person and talk to them as people and connect with them. So the goal is to connect with somebody, find a connection point. Whether that means, you're talking, swearing all the time and, talking about beer and partying, or it means, talking about investments or whatever. Like whatever you can to connect with an individual is the key to making them feel comfortable. So then when it comes time to doing the portrait, it's kind of less about the background, because these things are not really about the background. They're about the person. So obviously having a background that coincides with whatever the subject is about is important. At no point having a pilot, sitting in in a plumbing environment. So when you have the environment, when you have the location that lends to the subject matter, then that's kind of part of the battle addressed. And then once you've made what I call a human connection with the subject, that's another huge part of it. And then it's just trying to talk and make them feel comfortable. And then it goes down to, how I take a picture or what I see when I look through the viewfinder. Yeah. That's the only way I could really.
Yeah, So I obviously I will accept your answer. I have to say that there are a lot of photographs that you've taken where the backgrounds to me seem just right. An example that pops into my head is the Jocelyn Snow photo. I mean, if you know if obviously you do, but if one knows anything about her, where you put that giant bike and how she evidently got it up there, really said a ton about who she is as a person to me. I was amused by details. We talked about the Lyle Lovett photograph earlier. I was amused by spying a Super 73 in the background, which didn't seem like a rock star kind of. Anyway, I think there's a lot going on in those backgrounds is kind of what I'm saying. But what do I know?
I mean, I think someone like Jocelyn. It's I was up at her ranch. So I look around the ranch. I'm like, oh, what would be cool? What is Jocelyn known for? What is, some people, I don't know what they're known for. I don't know, I just don't know. Jocelyn is known as this, little woman who rides this big adventure bike, and kind of like for all the big guys that complain, oh, I don't want to drop the bike or blah, blah, blah. I mean, here's like a petite woman who show you that you can drop it and pick it up and no big deal. So I wanted to show, just how she's dwarfed by the bike and that kind of stuff. I think the greater the location, the more fun the photo will be. Yesterday I photographed a woman in front of, Randy's Donuts in LA. This big famous kind of donut shop with a giant donut on the roof. And I'm like, oh, we were going to go shoot at this old coffee shop. And I thought, I've never shot at Randy's Donuts, and I've lived in LA on and off for, 13 years. And I thought this would be cool. So try to show LA, so if I can identify like a cool location that the location is like a character, then I'll do that if I can. But sometimes you don't have that luxury. Sometimes it's just like a boring, shitty space. And then you really got to focus in on the person and forget about the space.
Right. Yeah, and I can picture some of those situations too. Did you ever find people wanted to be seen a certain way? Did people ever try to art direct themselves? Was that something you had to contend with?
Sometimes people feel that they have a look or like, oh, I'm known for doing this. Let me do this picture. Let me do this face or this whatever. Like more high profile people or more recognizable people. And I'm like, sure, do whatever you want. Like at the end of the day, I want the subject to feel comfortable. It's kind of the thing when people say to me, well, what should I wear? I always say, well, wear something that if you look back in 10 years, you're not going to be like, oh man, why did I wear that? You know? So if you want, I just want you to be comfortable. So whether that means, you know, jumping off your bike and, you know, making a silly face or just, you know, whatever, taking a bite of a donut or just sitting beside your bike and sipping coffee. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that you feel comfortable in the shot, that you're going to look back and feel happy and proud about it. And,
right.
You know, that's what I can do.
I'm curious. I mean, I guess a lot of these questions sound like process questions, but I'm really, what I think I'm trying to do is unearth some sense of, you know, kind of who we are. But I'll press on. And I read something a while back. It's going to seem like an odd question. You know, Yusuf Karsh, the very famous portrait photographer. I mean, obviously you know who that is, but I'll share in the show notes for those who don't. As soon as you see some of his work, you instantly know who he is, obviously, famous guy. He supposedly said at some point that within everyone there is a secret, and the photographer's job is to reveal it. And I thought of that quote after we met because I wondered if you had any moments like that, if especially with people who weren't used to the attention, if you had revelations you weren't expecting.
I don't necessarily believe that about like everybody has a secret and it's my job to you know divulge that secret. That to me is a little presumptuous. I think my job is for the like I said earlier that the viewer feels a connection to the subject. If I can get that across, then I think I'm doing a good job. Mm. But do I think, you know, the subject is revealing some secret? I think that's bullshit. I think I'm trying to take a good photo that people like for whatever reason. There could be myriad reasons why something appeals to you versus somebody else. And I don't know what that is, you know. I can only tell you why it appeals to me. So I think like it's art, you know, it's music. What appeals to you might not appeal to me. So all I can do is take a picture that I like and hope that it resonates. But you know, I can clearly see on using Instagram as a sounding board how some images are received better than other images. And I can recognize why that is in some of them. And some of those reasons disappoint me. And some of them are obvious, but I like, to me, photography is like taking the picture, talking to the subject and going through the process it's the closest I can be to giving birth. You know, I'm not pretending to know what it's like to give birth, to have a child, anything like that. But that's me giving birth to a piece of work, right? How it's interpreted after that is like a songwriter might say, look, I worked on the song, but now I put it out there and it's for you to interpret it any way you want. It doesn't matter to me, because for me, the artwork was the creating the picture. After that, I'm kind of done. So that's kind of how I look at it. It's not for me to say how somebody should interpret anything. All I can do is do the best I can. Again, for me, is like I had the experience of meeting the subject. That was the fun part for me. Like I got to hang out and I got to meet them and learn a little bit about them, and they invited me into their space. That is that's the feather.
Right. Yeah, I methey maybe I'm looking for, meaning where there isn't any, but I one of the things I like about all the portraits that you've done so far in this series is that they generally have a kind of unvarnished quality about them. There's not a lot of overt manipulation of the image, that I can see. It's just good craftsmanship. You haven't tried to layer on, some style that gives you ownership. They look like I said earlier. I used earlier the phrase family photos, and I mean that in the most generous way. I feel looking at them that the three of us are sitting around the table, if you like. Am I romanticizing that, or would you cop to that?
No, that's awesome. I love that. I think that's wonderful. I want to, I think a lot of people will look at, you could do a portrait, an identical lighting, identical everything. I could do a portrait of you, and I could do a portrait of Bruce Springsteen. And I'll put both of those pictures up on Instagram, and Bruce Springsteen will get like thousands of likes, and you might get 50, right? But it's only the perception of how we think we know somebody. So I love that, you would look at it and like, I kind of want to elevate everybody to the idea that they're viewed as a celebrity in a way, like I want all these photos to be looked at like, wow, this is really cool. What a cool photo, and and what a neat location, and what an interesting person. And I think everybody should be elevated to that. So if you feel like, you can sit around the table with the three of us, that's awesome. I love that.
Oh, good. You've rescued me from my romanticism. So I guess kind of related to that, I would sort of hesitate to call this an online persona, but there are pictures of you in a professional context online which present the image of this kind of urban, cool, black leather, guy on a Thruxton or whatever. But it's
that was the old me.
That was
when I looked cool. Okay. Now we're a snowsuit on a KTM.
Right. Well, so that was the question. So the David that I met was basically a grubby adventurer. I mean, he was well equipped, but he was a grubby adventurer. And you came across to me, maybe it was just the moment in time, but you came across to me as a compassionate and vulnerable guy. And so it begs the question: if you were one of your subjects, how would you have photographed yourself?
It's a great question, and I think about it all the time. I think about not so much the photo per se, but how would I answer the questions?
Right.
And sometimes I don't know if I would have a good answer to the questions. I don't know. I'd have to be. I feel like I need to be asked those questions, but I don't know. I definitely like. For sure, I like to look cooler than not cool. If I can look cool in a photo, I'm more inclined to show that photo than the photo where my face looks sideways and I'm like, and I look fat or whatever. There's 100% I'm going to try to make myself look cooler. And there's also no question, when I was riding my Thruxton, I looked way cooler, like I wore a black leather jacket and I wore cool jeans and cool boots and the bike was cool. And it just was cooler, like unequivocally cooler. But I don't have that luxury when I'm driving the KTM, when I'm riding the KTM. So it's about, am I wearing the right gear for the trip? And I'm on the road for 4 months and I don't really care. I'll look as cool as I can look, but after that, like, it's more about practicality. So I don't know, like, what was the question again? How am I perceived?
How would you shoot yourself?
In the foot. I would definitely try to make myself look cooler than I am. That's how I would do it. I would try to have the bike doing a wheelie going through the sand, something that is like, holy shit, I can't believe I just did that. Is there a photo proving it?
Right.
That also being said, I also think it's funny to show me messing up. Like I put online, I was riding last year with my friend Tim, and his girlfriend Nat, I guess his wife now, and we were in Arizona and we went to some water on the beach, and I was 100% sure I was going to drop the bike, and I'm like, Nat, film me about dropping the bike, because I had to turn around in the sand, and I was like, for sure I'm going to drop it, for sure, and I dropped it in like a second. I was like, did you get that? And I think that's hilarious too, because these are big, heavy bikes, and it's hard to ride through the sand. So yeah. I'm happy to show that. I'm happy to show me looking like a dum-dum.
I wonder if that's an evolution that we go through eventually. Because I was chuckling while you were talking about the two versions of yourself, because I think that's all of us, right? I mean, the Bruce that's inside my helmet, going down the road is like just ripped, and he's like maybe 30 and brooding poet, cool looking guy who can ride a motorcycle like Tom Cruise. And none of those things are true at all. And depending on the day, such as the day we met, I might not even be clean. So, I kind of feel like those two, I think those two things are in us all. And maybe the thing we're supposed to aim for is what you just said, where we celebrate the truth. Anyway, I highly doubt that anyone you photographed hasn't had at least that thought cross their mind.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think if you're riding a motorcycle, you aspire to a coolness anyway, right? You're like, oh, that's going to make me look cool. Or it's so cool to ride. Or it is inherently cool to ride a motorcycle. Even if you look like a jackass, you're like, whatever, man, I'm on a bike and you're not. So that is, it's built in. You can obviously look less cool on a bike than some people, but still at the end of the day, you're on a bike.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well, that's some truth right there. It kind of nicely sets up my next question. One of the things that I loved about the process, particularly the process of going on this trip and taking photographs, was that it had this kind of countercultural quality, right? So it was like one person on a bike, no more stuff than he could pack and carry, meeting people in person, one-on-one on the street, kind of relying on the kindness of strangers. And, while I appreciate that it ends up on social media, it's actually more like as a premise, it's more like a movie from the 60s. The trip could have happened any time in the last 50 years on this kind of countercultural premise that I'm trying to sell you. So I wonder if you could talk a bit about that. Why did it matter to you to do this as a nomad?
It didn't, frankly. Sorry. I don't think about things like that at all. None of that enters my mind. I focus on the job at hand, and the project was I wanted to use the motorcycle as a mobile photo studio. And I wanted to do this ride for my own reasons. I wanted to see Canada and the US, the South. I'd never really been. I think there's a narrative that can be put on somebody, and it's just like with all due respect, what you imagine the narrative for me is not, and many people, not just you, is not at all how I look at it. So I don't think about it like some kind of cultural thing or countercultural thing, or going at it alone. I mean, it crosses my mind. I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of doing this whole thing alone and whatever. But that's not. It's in a way that's almost like the art. It's like that's for other people to interpret. I don't give it that much weight. It's just a means to experience things, and I feel that it's I want to have these experiences in life. I want to be able to look back at my life, if I get the opportunity to look back on my life, and feel like I lived it with color, like I took chances, not silly chances, but I enjoyed my life. I did things, I lived. And so I ride the motorcycle, but I'm not trying to accomplish some great feat of I don't know, cultural revolution, or I'm trying to taste the 60s or anything like that. It's just, I'm trying to think, like, if I was into horseback riding, maybe I'd be like, oh, maybe I want to ride a horse around the country. Terry Fox ran with one leg. I think there's lots of different motivations, but I don't know, for me anyway, it doesn't come down to that kind of thing at all.
Right. Not consciously anyway. We don't want to break too many hearts here. I was, speaking of practical matters, I was very interested to learn that you had sponsors that helped make this trip possible in one way or another. And it was interesting because that's not a given with these things. There are lots of people doing pretty epic things on motorcycles that can't, kind of get their calls returned. And so I had to ask, what do you think they saw in this? I mean, there was clearly more to this opportunity than the fact that their stuff might get used. Obviously, they had some faith in your ability to record what you were going to experience. But I wonder if beyond that, there was anything they saw in this that was special.
Well, I think what happens is when I reach out to a potential sponsor, and not many people give me money. Money's not like, I'm not getting a lot of money. I'm getting a very nominal bit of money, just like a stipend, I would say. Doesn't cover the rent, and so it's mostly gear. And what I think that they see in me is a professional photographer, not a guy or a girl or woman who calls themselves an influencer and whatever. Like, I have a track record, so when somebody looks at my work, and they can go, oh, this guy's actually, he's photographed some famous people. And let's be honest, famous people impresses people. So it helps that I have a very good portfolio. So that's the first thing. I think I have credibility. The second thing is I don't overpromise. And that's really, really key, that I never overpromise with a potential partner. I kind of preface it and I say, look, I'm not an influencer, but I can promise you that I will, create good work. You're supporting a really cool project. So consider yourself part of the motorcycle project, the motorcycle portraits as a project versus, whatever other people might, this is a long-term project is what you're getting involved with. And I think being honest and straightforward and offering reciprocity whenever I can is appealing to the brands that have partnered with me. And I've delivered everything I say I'm going to deliver because I don't overpromise, and I think that's kind of, and I also try to identify brands that I really like, that I, for instance, I work with Climb and I work with Moscow Moto, and I believe really strongly in these brands. I don't just, it's not like, oh, I need a jacket, I'm going to call this brand. They're really good products, and I'm proud to wear them. And I'm proud to work with a company like Moscow Moto, who is like kind of a scrappy, they're not really a startup, but they're like a scrappy kind of smaller company doing really great products, and I like the people. They're like when I used to have to go to the lab, to the photo lab, and I wanted to know the guy who was processing my film. I didn't want to just drop it off a photo mat. So with Moscow Moto, with Climb, I have people that I know and I trust them, and they trust me. And so that's kind of like the logic of how I work with brands.
Yeah, which, I guess in a sense that's the only practical answer, is that they know they're dealing with a pro, and that's not necessarily the case for every adventurer. But you can see that I'm kind of digging around for romance here, and so I'll just ask you the question directly. Like, I acknowledge that you've said it's up to the viewer to decide how to interpret what they're seeing, and you've kind of said you don't feel and aren't going to prescribe a narrative to this thing, beyond what's obvious from looking at it. So I guess the question is, what do you want the world to see in these photographs? Let's say this whole thing becomes a phenomenon and a sought-after coffee table book and whatever else, and the motorcycle portraits becomes our most public record of who we are as a community. What do you hope people will see?
I hope that people will see a cross-section of humanity, of cultures and religions and sexualities and everything, who are riding bikes. And I in a way, I don't know how to articulate this properly, but there was a long period of time when photography wasn't really seen as an art form, right? It was painting and sculpture, etc.
Right.
And I feel like motorcycling is in a way been seen as this, I don't know, like it just sort of is. And, rough guys ride, or some people ride. But I want motorcycling to be understood as this really, and this is the part where I'm having a hard time articulating it, but like ephemeral kind of connection to the human spirit. And I hope that the audio interviews by this cross section of people will make people listen and go, wow, like there's something about motorcycling that I didn't know. Like I didn't understand that it connected on such a deep level. And so if that could come up across, that it's seen that way, this talk of freedom, it's really, there's like I feel like it's connected to your DNA. It's not just talk. It's not just like some guy or whatever, like the passion, the emotion that people talk. I mean, people have cried when they tell the story of the freedom and the experiences that it's provided for them. I want it to be recognized as almost like I want it to be recognized as an art form. I don't think it's an art form, but if you know what I mean, like I think it should be recognized as something more than a means to an end, than a transportation, like that it's really connecting something internally and appreciated for that beyond the people that ride. Because the people that ride, they know that, but perhaps there should be a study done, a psychological study done showing what it opens up in the mind and almost like a drug, how a drug or a sport can sort of rewire the brain. I think there's something to it.
Yeah, that's well put. When I started doing this podcast, it was 5 years ago, believe it or not, and it was still early enough in my adult riding career that I really couldn't see past my own passion for it. But as time has gone by, and I've heard from listeners, which I do, kind of daily, I'm always astonished at how sacred it is to them, and it's really actually made me, this is going to sound maybe sappy, but it's really actually made me love this community, if that makes sense. And so I was wondering, sort of as a follow-on from the last question, whether you came home seeing motorcyclists, differently than you did before you left. If this experience changed or expanded or added something to what you see when someone passes you on a bike on the road.
Yeah, I think, when I came back from my sort of proof of concept trip last summer, it kind of got me thinking about that. It hasn't really changed on this trip, just sort of reiterated to me. But I feel like the people who ride motorcycles, I mean, I think it's the coolest group you could be part of. Most people aren't going to be astronauts, so maybe that's the coolest group, but that's a very small group. And so riding a motorcycle is entry into communities that are, it's a key to every type of community. Like it could be a key to a bunch of accountants who ride motorcycles. It could be a key to a bunch of lawyers that ride motorcycles. It could be a key to a bunch of firemen that ride motorcycles, So it's an entry point into all of these different cultures. But it's like a VIP entry point. Oh, you ride a bike? I ride a bike. What do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a fireman. Oh, me too, or whatever. So it's really like a VIP ticket to every other culture and profession and whatever. I bet you, like, I don't know. I feel like maybe George Bush II would ride motorcycles. It would be like, oh, you ride, like I'm sure you could just sit and shoot the shit with the guy because you're just on a bike, or versus talking about politics. So I think it's an amazing culture, but you got to be on your bike or you got to be carrying a helmet, because if you're not, then it's hard to know,
Yeah, at least until you've established that connection, and then it's amazing how you kind of wind people up and they'll go. So I said earlier that I was a bit jealous of you having done this because I saw parallels in between what you're doing and what I've tried to do with this podcast, except that, as I say, yours is a more sophisticated and, richer solution. But I couldn't help but sort of kind of want to compare notes a little bit, if you like. And so in that spirit, I guess, so this will be one of my dumber questions, but maybe you've already started to answer it. You've been exposed to a lot of worlds besides motorcycling, and in as much as we've agreed that people have more in common than they want to admit, sometimes there are also distinctions that make communities what they are, I think. And so the question is: are motorcycle people a thing? I mean, given that breadth that you just talked about, lawyers and accountants and firemen and so forth, are we a thing? Is it a community, and does that community have an identity?
I definitely think it's a community, for sure. I think the identity I think motorcycling is a community like an umbrella, but I think there are verticals within motorcycling, and the communities are the different verticals. Like, are you a Harley rider? Are you an adventure rider? Are you a dirt bike rider? Are you a, whatever? So I think, I'm right now I'm part of the adventure riders. And so, those are the people that tend to like what I'm doing or impressed by it. But when I had my Thruxton, it was more like cafe racer guys and women and all of that kind of stuff, but still under the banner of motorcycling. So, I think you could go to the airport and have a big community get together with motorcyclists, and the Harley guys might hang out together, and the cafe racer guys might hang out together, and the adventure riders might hang out together. But if somebody, needed help in the whatever side, any of those other people would come and help. If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and there's no question that kind of tribal thing exists, and without this is going to seem facile, but I think that's especially pronounced where you live. Certainly the time I've spent in Los Angeles is the motorcycle community there is a community, but it's also several communities, and those communities are, quite specific. I think where bikes are less dense, like around here, for example, it's the boundaries are a little more porous, maybe. And so my next question was going to be: do you think people who ride motorcycles are different from other people? I mean, I kind of do, but I also haven't gone out and met 80 of them. Eye to eye. Is there a common denominator in your mind, and are we exceptional in some way?
I think there might be people who are less inclined to toe the line. I don't know that they have, quote unquote, a problem with authority or anything like that. But I think they like to do their own thing. They're not, they've had experiences and they enjoy making decisions for themselves. I don't think they're easily told what to do, because I think if anybody would follow the rules, they'd be like, no, motorcycling is scary, or it's dangerous and scary, and you shouldn't do it, right? And if you're the type of person that's just going to be like, oh, okay, then that's fine. That's you, right? Like that's how you're going to be. So the people who are riding motorcycles, they're going to make I feel like, they'll think for themselves. They'll question authority, that kind of thing. So I definitely think motorcyclists are those kinds of people. But that's not to say that you can have those types of people who don't ride motorcycles, right?
Yeah.
But I do think that by and large, there is an independent streak that runs through how they think and talk and act and live.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. He said with some relief. And I think it's got everything to do with autonomy and sovereignty. I don't think it's necessarily an antisocial thing, but I think almost the more modern the world becomes, the more meaningful it is to decide to put yourself in the position a motorcyclist puts themselves in, and that does feel more and more distinctive to me. And so I was curious to know whether you found that in people, and clearly you did. something else that I think makes this community, I feel like I'm being so directive here and I don't mean to, but one of the things I think makes this community seems to somehow make possible is a kind of leveling. So if you think about, like in your neck of the woods, the rock store on a Sunday morning, you're going to run into famous people and you're going to run into a whole bunch of people who are not famous, and they'll be somehow that will be subordinate to the fact that they're there to share this thing. I think this podcast attempts to accomplish that, and certainly the motorcycle portraits, to my eye, seems to be aimed at that same, kind of ecumenism, if that's a word. Did you, in fact, experience that, and if so, how?
You mean, do I find that like it brings together all different types of people? And I'm not sure I followed the question.
Yeah, it's so it not only that, but that it levels them out somehow.
Oh, yeah, like you could have a billionaire and a regular guy, and they're all just kind of sitting around talking about their bikes or that kind of thing. Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
definitely, because that's exactly what you have. You have people who roll up on a $100,000 Walt Siegel bike, and they're just as interested in talking to somebody about their KTM or whatever, And so I think there's definitely pulling, and it's not about your economics and stuff like that. And I think people look at it like, wow, it's so cool. I'd like to be part of that. And, I may be very successful in business or whatever, but I don't know anything about motorcycles, or I'm an amateur motorcyclist. And this community doesn't look at me as like, they don't want anything from me. They're not always asking for my money or always asking for this. They just want to hang out. They want to go for a ride. So I think there's a great sense of that. This idea of I'm kind of antisocial in so much as like, I don't like to be around, like I don't like large groups of people, and I'm kind of a lone wolf. And like you'd never, ever, ever find me, I can't imagine, unless someone's paying me, to be at something like Sturgis or go to the rock store. I don't like going and just hanging out. I want to ride. I want to meet. Like if I'm like, oh, I'll meet you at the rock store, and I'm not turning my bike off and let's go for a ride.
Right.
And we'll get a coffee at the end. But I don't like to just go and see and be seen. It's not my scene to do that. So I don't roll like that. But that's me. I'm like, I don't know, I'm a dick. I like it like one-to-one. I'm all about one-to-one. I'm not about like hanging out with a bunch of people or very often, like it's not like you'll never see me do it, because that would be wrong. That's not fair for me to say. That'd be hypocritical, but I certainly don't search it out. That's for sure.
Yep. Yeah, I get that, and I think you probably do the right thing for a living. Given that preference for kind of one-on-one and even being solitary, but it's hard not to notice that the. I guess what was behind the question is I was curious about how curated this was, specifically because there are people that you've shot who are famous, and there are people you've shot who are anything but famous, and. I suppose the purest answer is, look, I'm just talking to people who ride bikes, but it there's this meta thing that when you look at the whole collection of pictures, there seems to be a point being made, even if you didn't set out to make it, that in this one way we're all the same.
Well, yeah, I mean that's definitely true. I just wanted to focus on people whose lives are really connected. So they are the same in that sense, I don't, I'm not sure. I guess, again, I'm not really sure I'm not sure if I'm following the question.
Yeah, I guess I'm. I guess again, maybe I'm being prescriptive here, but what I love is the way that motorcycles have a way of leveling the room, and that seems to be reflected in the, in what I'm seeing in your work. And I'm just sort of curious as to how conscious that was. I guess is maybe the briefest way to put it.
Well, I don't think that was not a conscious thing for me to show how it was sort of leveling the room at all. It was, and maybe that's naive of me or sort of dumb, but I again, I'm just really interested in the people, and then the story tells itself. It becomes clear when I ask the questions over and over again, and I get similar types of answers. So it's weird. It's like we all like to think we're different. We all like to think we're independent or we're individuals, and we're a group of a million individuals. So it's kind of weird that way, like how I'm alone, like me talking about myself. I'm a lone wolf, and I do this and I do that, and but I'll meet like another 100 guys that act exactly the same way. I'm like, oh, you also don't like to hang out with people? Yeah, I hate people, and so it doesn't matter how individual or special you think you are. There's like a whole bunch of guys or women that like are exactly the same, and sometimes that can be like, oh shit, I thought I was really special, or it can be like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like I thought I was really alone, but I'm not alone. There's people who think and act and perceive the same way I do. Like I remember when I went to art college from high school, and I was like, wow, man, people see life the same way I did. I didn't know people thought about it like that. So that was cool. And I think that motorcycling is it's kind of a big connecting feel there. Like people feel that camaraderie and the similar things versus all the other things in their lives,
Yeah.
So, but I didn't consciously go out. I didn't consciously go out to do anything. The only thing I consciously went out was to do portraits of people whose lives were deeply connected to motorcycle. I didn't want to manipulate the story. I learned a long time ago that if you try to force something, then it's not going to be what you want. So I want the story to tell itself.
Right.
All I can do is meet the individual, ask them the questions, and let it happen from there. If after 2 years or whatever, and 80 something portraits, there becomes a clear kind of story or a narrative that becomes clear, then that's kind of cool. That's like pretty innocent. That's just telling it like it is, so
Right.
That's cool.
Right. It's funny. I think maybe if I were you, I would have preferred to do this interview in a couple of years, because I kind of get that you don't want structure put on top of this thing or the assumption of an agenda. Meanwhile, I'm sitting over here as an audience for your work, and what I'm getting out of it is exactly the words you just used a few minutes ago, which is you're not alone. But I've been around enough artists to know that you don't want this formalized. I finally get it. 90 minutes into our conversation, good answer, and I agree. I think that there's almost nobody who wants to know they're not alone more than someone who prefers to be alone, if that makes sense.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I feel very lonely lately. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. And I kind of described that with regards to this trip. Like there were certainly lots of time, like the majority, like the big majority of the trip, I was alone. And there were times when I was lonely, and at the stage I'm at in my life, I definitely feel a little more lonely. And with COVID and with all the things, and I think a lot of people feel more lonely or more isolated than they have been in the past. And so I recognize that in myself, and I look to connect, and I like the community that I connect with. Like I do like the motorcycle communities there. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of like it because for me, it's like, oh, I could go traveling. That's something I love to do. There's an independence. It's not like you're going to ride with 30 guys or girls or whatever. You're going to ride with a couple, and that's kind of generally it. So I like that. There's a lot of things that I particularly gravitate towards with regards to motorcycling. So I So I appreciate it. I appreciate that you can be two people experiencing something and sharing this experience. Sometimes as a photographer, I experience things on my own, and that can be a little lonely. I have this great experience and I have nobody to share it with. In a way, I'm having this great experience and I'm having it alone for most of it, but I'm getting to share it and I'm getting feedback, which is nice. And that's something I don't often get if I'm photographing a tribe in Ethiopia. I'm experiencing alone, and people like the pictures, but I'm not really connecting with it with other people. It's not like a bunch of photographers are saying, "Oh yeah, man, that was cool, and I did that story too," and blah blah blah. It's not like that. I got a bunch of motorcycle people who are telling me, that they can identify with it or come ride here, and that's kind of neat. So maybe it's helping me to feel like I'm part of a community.
Yeah. Well, that'd be the best of all, wouldn't it? If by the time, you felt like you were approaching a finish line, you'd got something out of this as well. Because we who are going to look at these photographs, our agenda will be selfish, and I've told you what I get out of them, but it'd be pretty cool if you got something too.
Yeah, I mean, like I guess for the top level for me, I want them to be good pictures. As a photographer, I want them to be good pictures. Like I want them to hang somewhere. To me, that'd be cool. That people could come and look at them and listen to them. That's kind of like a cool thing for me as a photographer.
Just kind of one more question in this particular vein, and it has to do with this idea of feeling like we're not alone, because I think that's kind of a huge thought. Every time I open my email, I'm reminded of how much motorcycling means to the people who do it. It's remarkable to me. It's a passion at the low end of the scale, and it's not unusual to hear from people who, for whom it's an existential imperative that it keeps them alive. People say motorcycles saved my life. I hear that lots, and I know that that other people do too. So I guess I'm curious to know whether you got that sense from the people you photographed, or whether you got that sense from this journey, that a deeper understanding of what this means to us.
Well, it's kind of like I was saying, how I think motorcycling is like this ephemeral connection to the spirit and everything. So I definitely think that it saves lives in a weird way. Like I think it helps people's mental health, their sanity. I hear it over and over again. What it, the ability, like freedom is a term that's thrown around a lot. But I think what it's saying is that I can make my own decisions and I can do what I want to do. That's what I think people are saying by freedom, is like, if I have a job or I have these responsibilities or family, kids, whatever, where I don't have the autonomy to make decisions for myself. But when I'm on the motorcycle, every decision I make is about myself. And I think that is a very healthy reason why people get on a motorcycle. It's so they can make their own decisions. Everything is like done for us now. And you get in a car and, most cars are automatic. There's nothing to driving anymore. That's why everybody's like, whatever, on their phone, they're doing something else. They constantly, I hear about how when they're on a bike, they have to focus. They can't think about work, or the phone can't be in their ear, and they just have to focus on what is at hand. And I think that is a very valuable element to our person, And so I see that constantly.
Yep, and it gets more precious by the day, it seems.
Yeah.
So I assume that the day will come that this project will be finished, or maybe not, but let's imagine that it reaches maturity in some form. Now, you I guess the question is what will the lasting value of this record be? So in your other work, the product of your efforts is designed to make us understand other cultures. Presumably to the benefit of humanity, or it's designed to, make us appreciate there's always a kind of a functional objective to this stuff. Whereas this, kind of by your own account, is expected to stand as art, that you did not go into it with an agenda. You haven't, committed to a functional goal for all this stuff. So that being the case, it must therefore be there must be something you hope will justify its continued existence, if that makes sense. What of lasting value are you creating here?
Well, I don't use the term like art too often, and I don't know that this is art at all. But it would be cool if the pictures were visible somewhere. The goal is to make a book. I mean, that's kind of what I'm working towards right now. I would love it if this is maybe my ego talking. Well, I think it's a little bit my ego, but I think it's also my experiences that I think this would make a great sort of / travel show. Because of the people that I'm meeting and the talking about the breaking down of politics and religion and all that stuff. And I think there's value to it. And I think it'd be a really cool, interesting series to watch. Whether that happens or not, I have no idea. But what I would like it to do is, I don't know, whatever. Like if somebody sees it and they like it, that's cool. I don't know. I can't. Anything else? I don't know. I mean, it would be great if I could earn some money from it. That would be nice. Spoken
like a true artist.
Yeah, man. I don't know. I mean, it sounds so silly, but like, yeah, man. I'm just out taking pictures. I don't know. Like, I want it to be appreciated. I think it is being appreciated. I think it's interesting that all the work I've done in my career, this one seems to be getting a lot of attention. So that's cool, And but it's difficult. It's difficult to know how. It's very difficult as an individual to move it forward, to push it forward. I have limitations, just skill limitations and access to people and whatever. So it's a question of like finding the right partners who believe in it, who can see it becoming more than perhaps than what I see it as. That would be great. But I don't know. Like, again, back to my low expectations, rarely disappointed. If nobody sees it beyond the website, if that's the end of it, then it's been a great experience for me. So that I have to be happy with what I've gotten from it,
Yeah.
And I am by all means, I am.
Yeah. It's funny. I think I probably have I have more romantic ambitions for this than you're prepared to admit to. Because I look at it as
What you want it to be. Tell me what you want it to be.
Well, I think there's two things that are cool about it. One is that as a motorcyclist, I love this "you're not alone" thing. I love looking at all these people who have nothing apparently in common, who have this in common, and that's validating to me somehow. That makes me feel like part of something, even though I, like you, prefer to be alone. It's nice to know that in my solitude, I'm part of a community that recognizes its own existence. So I think that's good and worth celebrating. And the other thing is that, and this is like crazy pipe dream stuff, but I think it's an amazing example to the world of how a bunch of people can spend more time obsessing about what they share than they do about what makes them different. And wouldn't that be a fine example right now? And wouldn't it be awesome if this somehow broke through and became a matter of general interest rather than just interest in motorcycles? So there's two things. Two dreams I might have if I had your talent and resources. Two dreams I might have. for, that would justify, the investment you've made. But I'm not sure whether you're just that modest or if you're just self-handicapping.
Well, it's really hard, man. It's really hard to, I can't do that on my own. It would be great if it would be recognized like that. I'm totally down with that. I don't have the answers to get it to those places, though, So that's where, if there are people that have access to something that can get it across those finish lines, I'm like, yeah, let's totally do it. I'm 100% down with that. I'd love it to be as big as possible. I'd love it to be, I reached out to CBS News. I told them about the story, and, because I know that they do these, sometimes they're interested in photography, and I reached out, but I didn't hear back, I'm having to be the publicist and the marketer and the social media. Plus I'm also the photographer.
Yeah.
It's like I'm the postman and the policeman and the, whatever in the little town. So I have lots of lofty ideas, but it's just, it's exhausting, and it would be great to have a producer on board who could be making the phone calls and getting stuff happening, because I think there is great value to it, for sure, 100%.
Yep. Yeah, no, I actually sympathize. It is a lot to expect you to produce the work and pitch it as well. Now, I do know.
I have to.
So go ahead.
Until somebody takes over. I'm going to put together like a little sizzle reel to try to make it appealing to, to maybe some brand or whatever. I don't know. I'm trying. Yeah.
Well, don't stop. Now, I know one of the things that you're looking at doing, if you can pull it off next, is to go abroad and continue this work. And I was happy to hear that, because the way that I discovered you was actually through Bobby Singh's story. So to me, this was that before it was your trip in North America. Can you talk a bit about that? What have you got in mind, and how close are you to making it real?
Oh, well, I'm in conversation with one of the sort of sponsors, who's actually European based, about going to Europe next summer. I feel like time goes by so fast. I want to get like a basic commitment, financial commitment, to do it. And then I want to identify other brands that might be interested in sponsoring, but I don't have anything. I only sort of, how do I put this? Like on the trip, there was like one day I woke up and I thought, man, maybe I should try to do this in Europe next summer, because like I'm not old, but I'm getting older, and every year it just gets a little harder, right? And these are big productions in a way, even though it's just by myself, and I don't want to wait 5 years. So I feel like I'm in the groove now. So I'm not the type of person that wants to take off for a year or two and travel around the world. Like it's too much. It was exhausting being on the road for 4 months, but I'd be totally down with doing it in pieces, And so I am, if I can get a commitment from this company that they're willing to move forward for next year, then I'll push forward. In the meantime, I'll talk to other brands. And, one of the lessons I learned on this trip was I had intended to camp the majority of the trip, but it was so hot that I had to stay in hotels. So if I had a hotel partner, I could have saved a tremendous amount of money, but I didn't have one. So I did not save a tremendous amount of money, So that's the kind of thing I'd like to reach out to. But that's the kind of thing, having a producer or something involved would help a lot.
Yeah.
So I just got home 2.5 weeks ago, or whatever, 3 weeks ago. And I still have I have like another 15 or 16 images to edit. Plus I'm shooting another 3 shots in the next couple weeks or something, 3 or 4 more shots. And, and I also have to work and pay the bills. So I've got to get actually paying jobs unless I can get paid to begin doing this, So, Yeah. So going to Europe is something I would like to do. If I can do it, I'll do it. And I'd probably want to go from the UK across the continent.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I'd be excited if you could pull that off. Maybe someone listening to this will have the answer. I have to ask. I mean, I feel like I know. I feel like maybe I know how you might answer this question, but on my list of questions, the penultimate one was: has this in any way changed you?
I don't know. I really don't know if it's changed me. I feel I'm not sure. I mean, I would love to say yes, it's changed me, but I'm not sure that it has. It's reiterated thoughts that I've had time and again about how people are good, generally speaking, even though Nick Cave says people just ain't no good. I think they're good. But yeah, I don't know. I feel the same way. Most things. I think, yeah, I don't think it really changed me. I think things that changed me are like losing my mom has made me far more sensitive and more emotional. I can say that that's changed me, but I don't know. Maybe I'll look back on this. Maybe I'm too close right now, but maybe I'll look back on it and say, yeah, that trip totally changed me. But I've traveled a fair amount in my life, and I've done a lot of cool things. It's not the first thing that I've done that's kind of a little different. So in that sense, I'm not so sure. But I think we talked about sort of gravity and all of that. And I do think that it doesn't get any easier as you get older to break the sort of chains of gravity that hold you in your life, whatever that is. Even if you have what appears to be like a pretty free and easy life, like it might appear that I have, which is really not true at all. But I remember like just starting, I don't normally get anxiety. But a couple of days before I left on this trip, I was getting a little like anxious. I was like, fuck, this is a big trip. I've never done a trip like this. I've been away to India for 4 months, but I've never been on the road for 4 months. I didn't know if I could do this. I didn't know if I could, I didn't know if I could handle like mechanical issues. I just didn't know. I mean, I believed I could, or I wouldn't have done the trip to begin with, but I didn't know how I would face them should the problem happen. I thought about doing the Trans-Labrador Highway, and it was pretty isolated. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to do it. And, whatever, I did it. So I'll tell you a story. When I was young, when I was 19, I went to Europe. I had saved money, and I wanted to Eurorail. And I've always been a Ferrari fan. And I had wanted to go to the Ferrari factory. So I set that as a very specific goal to go to the Ferrari factory. And I remember I took a bus and a train and I hitchhiked and I got to the Ferrari factory. And this was like 1989. Ferrari was in the doldrums, like nothing going on there.
Yeah.
And I remember, and I wrote it in my diary, that I felt incredibly empowered because I set this goal. I accomplished this goal. I felt that I could do anything. I felt that as long as I put one foot in front of the other, I could get it done. And I've kind of felt that way my whole life. And that was the first experience. And that was a lesson that I kind of taught myself at 19. And it's been that way my whole life. Like, oh, I'm going to move from Toronto to LA, or I'm going to move from LA to New York, or I'm going to move from New York to Toronto, or I'm going to move from Toronto to LA, or I'm going to travel for this, I'm going to do that. I just do it. And I don't always know what the outcome is going to be, but I feel like it's better than sitting at home. So I just do it.
Right. With a camera.
Yeah, with a camera. Yeah, that gives me it justifies my action.
Maybe for you, that's the story. Interesting. Well, you know what? I am super glad that you're doing this, and I love the work, and I love the way the story's growing, and I think it's going to be, a little cultural treasure for us. I hope you get a chance to enjoy that feeling yourself, as the thing matures, and And in the meantime, it's just been a pleasure meeting you. It was a pleasure meeting you in person, and it's been a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for saying all that stuff, and thank you for believing in the project and recognizing it in maybe ways that I don't necessarily see it quite yet. But it's like, as a creative person, it's sometimes you work in a vacuum. Very often you work in a vacuum, and it's like when you poke your head out, you don't know if anybody's going to like it or care about it. And granted, there's a built-in audience in the motorcycle community, so I'm still very, very grateful, and so it's nice to hear it, and I appreciate it. So, and it was nice to meet you in person. It was nice to talk to you and taking the time to hear what it's about. It means a lot.
Well, you're more than welcome, and hopefully we'll stay in touch. And if you need a little, boost from the romantic corner of the motorcycle room, you have my email address, and I will, I'll try to find a way to make you, verklempt about what you're doing, because I think some of us are.
You wanted me to cry, huh? That was your goal, get me to cry.
I know I failed, but it was fascinating conversation.
If you know any rich benefactors, that would be helpful, or companies. That would be great.
Noted. Well, enjoy your well-earned rest in sunny California, and ride safe out there. And as I say, let's stay in touch. I'm dying to see what happens next.
Cool. Yes, I agree. And thank you very, very much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Well, you could probably tell that David Goldman was reluctant to attach any emotional or philosophical agenda to the motorcycle portraits, which is fair enough. It's right to leave it to us to interpret. After all, these are just pictures of motorcycle people, right? I thought, well, maybe that should be cool enough. Maybe I'm just overthinking it. And then, listening back as I edited this, I kind of caught him. I caught him saying, and I quote here, "I want motorcycling to be understood as an ephemeral connection to the human spirit," and a few moments later added, "to be recognized as an art form." Well, as I said at the time, I kind of felt rescued, and it brought to mind an old joke, reborn in a famous commencement speech by the late David Foster Wallace. It goes like this. There are two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way. And the older fish nods at them and he says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" Well, the two young fish keep swimming for a while, and then eventually one of them turns to the other and says, "What the hell is water?" Well, the story became the jumping off point for a wonderful speech, the message of which has something to do with freedom being about awareness of who we are, that we're not alone, that we have an impact, and that the impact we have is a result of the choices that we make. It's a great speech, and I'll share a link in my show notes if you're not familiar with it. But back to the point, what made me think of it after listening to David Goldman? Well, a couple of things, I guess. One is that he's still right not to tell us what to see in this work, especially given that he's very much in the water with us, still experiencing it himself. And the other is that we should probably never stop trying to see it for ourselves. When David Goldman said that thing about the human spirit, he kind of poked his head out, as he put it, poked his head out of the water for a moment and saw some kind of bigger picture. And that's the lesson of his story, I think. The thing that we should do too, not constantly, but now and then, and for as long as we ride. Because as long as we remember what we're part of, we won't forget how lucky we are, how cool this is, to use David's word, and how transformative it is. As far as the world is concerned, when people look at the motorcycle portraits, I hope they see that we're a diverse collection of people who make this planet a little more interesting. But when we look at them, I hope what we see is that this is the water we swim in. This is us. Well, thanks for listening. You'll find show notes for this episode at thismotorcyclelife.com. That's also how you can reach me if you have questions, comments, or suggestions about the podcast. Emailing me at thismotorcyclelife@gmail.com works too, and I do love to hear your stories. You can find me lurking on Instagram too, watching the motorcycle world go by while I wait for spring. That's also where you'll find many of the people I've interviewed for this podcast, including David Goldman and the Motorcycle Portraits. Well, sometimes finding an episode's playlist recommendation turns into a bit of a treasure hunt, and that was very happily the case with this one, because I ended up connecting with an absolutely astonishing British blues guitarist named Scott McKeon. Besides performing and recording for himself, Scott is one of the most sought-after session players in the UK, with a resume that includes pop giants like Van Morrison, Eric Clapton, and Ed Sheeran, along with the cream of contemporary blues players, too many of them to name here, I'm afraid. His playing is breathtaking. If blues are your thing and you've somehow missed Scott McKeon the way that I did, well, you're welcome. And this episode's very appropriate track is called All the Same. Buy it or stream it wherever you like to get your music. And in the meantime, keep staying alive out there.